Hello, and welcome to the Shooting Stars Draft League. We're happy to have you here as a participant or spectator.
This video is intended to be a primer for the three main tools we'll be using both during the draft process and in gameplay.
My name is Servier. I'll explain the draft zone and its features.
And my name is Zero. I'll be describing Pokémon Showdown and the damage calculator. Now I'll hand it off to Servier to break down Draftzone.
This is Pokemon Draftzone, a wonderful tool that you'll be able to utilize to plan or make multiple plans for your upcoming draft, help facilitate your draft process, do some battle prep, submit battle results, and if you so choose, do some battle result analysis. Notably, in order to use all such features of Pokemon Draftzone, you will need to log in. There are a few different ways of doing so, including setting up your own individual account with the website. Once you are logged in, you'll both have access to all of this web tools features, and you'll be able to save your work across multiple devices. Now let's talk about how you'll be able to use this tool to plan for your upcoming draft in the planner. Notably, the planner has a lot of different tools to help you out. However, most of them become apparent as you fill your list. Before we do that though, you'll have to tell Draftzone about your draft, the format, the rules set, as well as how many Pokemon you're allowed to draft, both a minimum and a maximum, how Pokemon are valued, either by points or in tiers, and if you're going with the point system, you'll need to tell Draftzone how many points you're allowed to use. For example, let's say you're doing a singles draft in the latest rule set, and you're allowed to draft 10 Pokemon, no more, no less, and you have 110 points to work with. Once you have finalized your settings, and for a different tool, make sure to keep this rule set on Gen 9, otherwise it will not work properly. I will get to that later. Back to filling out the list. You will likely want to start planning by selecting a Pokemon that is worth a high number of points, since they are the most sought after all. Now, Draftzone does not know your draft board or how many points the Pokemon are worth, so you will need to enter them manually. Let's say, for example, you have drafted an Annihilate. An Annihilate is worth 20 points. Below your list, there is a points remaining and average readout. These values will update automatically as you enter Pokemon into your list. In this example, Annihilate is worth 20 points out of our 110, so we have 90 points remaining and 9 Pokemon slots remaining. So that leaves us an average of 10 points per our 9 Pokemon. Let's say you're also planning to draft a Rillaboom, worth 16 points. And let's go one step further and say you're also planning to draft an Arcanine, worth 12 points. At this point, we have used 48 of our points. So we have 62 remaining, leaving us an average of 8.86 for our 7 remaining slots. And as you continue to fill this list, you will see the right side of this web tool update with more and more information. Let's go ahead and fill in the rest of this list now. Now that this list is completed, we'll have all the more information over on the right here for our complete draft pool. Notably, the summary section gives you a brief description of all the Pokemon in your list, their typings, their potential abilities, and their base stat totals. And you can sort these Pokemon by any particular stat of your choice just by clicking on them, including in descending order or ascending order. In a lot of cases, sorting your Pokemon by speed will be helpful. However, we will be able to see another tool later that does an even better job at describing your team's speed. There is also a slider down here for neutral value. Keeping it at 80 is generally good. It is par for the course for many draft boards. But should you so choose, you can lower this value to elevate the evaluation of your team, or you can increase it to be a little more pessimistic in evaluating your team. In whichever case, the stats that are at or close to your designated neutral value will be highlighted in some variation of gray, and stats that are further below average will be highlighted in some variation of red, deepening in red the further away from neutral the stat is. This also goes for stats that are above your average, but they are highlighted in green. Another helpful section of this planner is the type chart. And this will update as you add Pokemon to the list as well. Defensive type chart will show you a brief description of all of your Pokemon and how defensive they are against each type of attack type move. And this will show your Pokemon's neutrally defensiveness, resistances, weaknesses, and immunities, as well as your double weaknesses and double resistances, should you have any. And below this chart is the team typing statistics table, which you can use to evaluate how balanced your team's weaknesses and resistances are. So in this example, this collection of Pokemon is relatively weak to Flying type, Psychic type, Ghost type, and Fairy type attacks in general, though more so when it comes to the Ghost and Flying types. In many cases, you will want to look at the Delta stat to figure out just how balanced or unbalanced your weaknesses and resistances are. There is also a checkbox up here to determine whether or not you want to consider your Pokemon's potential abilities in determining their defensiveness. Clicking this will turn them off, and the charts will update accordingly. So in this example, turning abilities on changes the charts a little bit, in particular for Arcanine's fire resistance, and Earthworm's weakness to ground, as well as Toxicroak's defensiveness against water and fire. These correspond to Arcanine's ability of Flash Fire, making it immune to fire-type attacks, Toxicroak's Dry Skin, which notably makes him immune to water-type attacks, but makes him a little weaker to fire-type attacks, and Earthworm's Earth Eater ability, which makes him immune to ground-type attacks. The next section in the planner is the moves section, and the moves considered here aren't simply just every attacking type move and other moves. In fact, many attack type moves won't even show up here. What's important here are all these special traits of the moves that the Pokemon in your draft pool can learn. These include priority moves, setup, healing, hazards, and many other things. See which moves are in consideration? Just give a category a click. And if you see a move in here that you are not sure what it does, just hover over the move. You will see a brief description of what it does. There is a checkbox here to show unlearned moves. If you click it, all moves in all categories will be counted, regardless of whether you have a Pokemon that can learn the move. Knowing what all the moves in these categories are may be helpful. However, in experience, this may cause more confusion than anything else. So I would recommend leaving this off, unless you're prepared to just see every move in the list here on Draftzone. The next section of the planner is the coverage. And this is where you can analyze your draft pool's effective coverage options, notably in all the different types, and you can go on a Pokemon per Pokemon basis. For example, let's look at this Annihilape. As we can see, it has a lot of coverage options in the physical side of the moves, and not quite as many special move coverages. Of course, the other Pokemon are here in smaller circles, and we can see for ourselves their respective coverages at a glance. Small interruption here. I learned just a little bit ago that the rule set here for the planner settings has a National Dex and a Paldea Dex at the time of recording. This may or may not be a trend in the future of Pokemon Draftzone, but if you select the National Dex, Draftzone will use its knowledge of all the Pokemon's abilities and moves from all known generations, whereas something like the Paldea Dex, or just the Regional Dex, will use the Pokemon's abilities and moveset from that generation only. Most notably, this affects something like whether or not you're playing with Hidden Power or not, since that was removed in Gen 9. Back to our regularly planned recording. For more details, and just how many moves the Pokemon can learn per type, go ahead and give the part of the circle a click. This is the range of physical coverage moves Annihilape can learn. In a case such as this, there are many moves, so not all of them will necessarily show up with proper text. However, hovering over each move gives you detailed information about its base power, accuracy, power points, and additional effects. If you want to filter even further, click on the type, and you'll just see the list of moves of that type. To go back, simply click on the Pokemon. And if you want to evaluate another Pokemon in more detail, just give them a click. Start the process over again. Below this Pokemon move coverage section, there is a team coverage UI. This chart will show you the number of Pokemon in your draft pool that can learn coverage moves under each type. Notably, you can view this chart considering both physical and special, physical only, or special only. Additionally, you can filter moves out by changing this minimum move base power slider. It's set to 60 by default, which is a fair minimum to consider at first. But should you want more granular results in this chart, you can increase the desired minimum move base power. Or say you want to consider like some sort of technician setup, you can lower the base power that you're considering, and the chart will update accordingly. The next section of the planner is extremely helpful in two different situations, and it is the Find tool. The Find tool is helpful both when you're trying to figure out how to fill out the rest of your list in a planned draft pool, or in the event during the draft that, say, a different coach drafts a Pokemon that you were planning to draft. For example, perhaps someone might snag the Noivern before you do, and you need to find a replacement. While Draftzone can't search based on point values for you, you can search under a multitude of filtering conditions. You can search by ability, type, base stat totals, specific stat values, and many other conditions. Say, for example, your planned Eevee-like Pokemon was snagged away from you, and you need to find a Pokemon that is not fully evolved to give your Eevee-like to. You can search through Pokemon with a condition as simple as this, and all the options will show up. Notably, with a filter such as this, your results will be very, very widespread. So I just recommend that you add some more conditions. Like, say, a type. Maybe you specifically want a normal type Pokemon that is not fully evolved. This list is still long, but not quite as long as before. You can filter even further. Say we want a base stat total of at least 400. Now this list is even shorter. Let's say even further still. You want to find a Pokemon that fits these categories, that has some coverage in the form of at least an electric type move. And you can keep going with more and more conditions. Just be careful. If your conditions are too strict, you may not find anything at all. If this happens to you, you can go ahead and remove the condition by pressing on the minus button to the right of it. Now, all this time, we have been searching for Pokemon that fulfill all of these conditions. If you instead just want to search for Pokemon that fit any of these conditions, click here and select any in the drop-down menu. Your list of found Pokemon may broaden as a result. You can also add a group to add just another group of filters to broaden your results. Or if you don't feel the need for it, you can remove the group. There is an advanced mode to the Find filter. However, in my experience, I have yet to find a reason to specifically use this advanced mode. If you happen to find a reason to do so, feel free to let me know. But in many cases, this ability to just add conditions and add filter groups should suffice for most use cases. And remember, Draftzone does not have access to your draft board. So as you search for Pokemon in the Find tool, you will need to make sure that the Pokemon you're finding and planning to add to your planner actually exist on the draft board. And finally, With the Planner tool, you are able to make as many draft plans as you'd like. Just remember to configure the settings for each draft plan. And do take care to not make too many plans. You don't want to spend too much time sifting through your options and have analysis paralysis, after all. When it comes to the draft process itself, the planner here has some checkboxes that you can click to denote whether you've drafted the Pokemon or not. When you successfully draft a Pokemon that you've planned for, go ahead and click on the checkbox under Drafted to help you remember that you did actually get that Pokemon for yourself. Additionally, if you've drafted a Pokemon and the format allows it, you can also designate the Pokemon as a Terra Captain per the rules and regulations. If you've made that decision, click on the Captain checkmark, so that you can remember later that this is one of your Terra Captains. When your draft is said and done, and you have a finalized draft with all the Pokemon drafted, you can go on over here to the settings and click Save to a new league. Fill in your league name, your own team name, and if you'd like, you can put the link to the draft board here. Go ahead and verify that the team that you have drafted up is correct. And once you have, go ahead and submit your team. Now let's talk about how you'll use Pokemon Draftzone for battle prep. With your draft team finalized, go ahead and click on the matches. When you've figured out who your next opponent is, you can add your team with the plus button here. Just go ahead and put in their team name, their coach name should you desire it, and if you want to give a special label to which stage of the draft this is, you can do so here. Once you do, you'll need to fill in your opponent's team. I will go ahead and do that real quick now. Once you have filled in your opponent's draft pool, go ahead and click Submit. And once you do, the matchup shows up here. Go ahead and click on View Matchup. Here you will see much of the same information that you saw before in the Planner section, including team summary, defensive type chart, moves, move coverage, and there's even more to discover here. Landing on this page at first might seem a little overwhelming, so let's go through it step by step. The draft summary, as before, this time will default to showing you a brief description of your opponent's draft pool. Their Pokemon, their types, their potential abilities, and base stat totals. As before, you have this neutral value slider that you can modify as you wish. However, now there's a new button up here, which you can use to switch to your draft pool and back. The defensive type chart will also default to showing you your opponent's defensive type chart, their Pokemon and their weaknesses and resistances as before, as well as their weakness resistance summary table below. Once again, you also have this abilities checkmark, and a new button to switch to your draft pool and back. The moves section here also defaults to your opponent's draft pool, and the moves their Pokemon can learn that fulfill each category. And you have this button once again to switch to your team and their moves that they can learn in each category. Over to the right is a new move coverage table. Now that you and your opponent each have a set of Pokemon to consider, this tool has got additional features. Notably, this will default to showing you your draft pool, their coverage moves, and an overview of the opponent's team. Notably, you can also click the individual move types to either have the tool consider that type or not when determining the effectiveness against your opponent's draft pool. Notably, on the right here, your opponent's Pokemon will either be highlighted in green if your Pokemon's move pool that you are currently considering is effective against them, in gray if it is just effective, or red if every move you are considering is resisted by that particular Pokemon. You can do this for every Pokemon in your lineup. Notably, you can also switch the view to see your opponent's point of view and see which of your Pokemon are particularly weak to which kinds of coverage you want to consider of your opponent's draft pool. And back. I skipped over it earlier, but there is also this speed tiers tool, which will show you effective speeds on the right side under various conditions, such as EVs, IVs, abilities, and Choice Scarf, as well as stat boosts. By default, EVs, IVs, and abilities are under consideration. However, by clicking this button, you'll pull up a drop-down menu showing you more and more options, such as Choice Scarf, Iron Ball, Paralysis, Tailwind, and stat boosts and reduction. You can enable or disable any number of these for your team on the left, or for your opponent's team on the right. And these options will update the table accordingly. However, looking at every combination of Pokemon can cause confusion and may not be necessary, depending on what sort of considerations you are trying to make. And therefore, on the left here, you will see every Pokemon's base speed ordered from bottom to top. And you can click on any one Mon in your team and any one Pokemon in the opponent's team to make more specific comparisons with any of these filters as mentioned before. And these base speeds are also listed in the general matchup summary UI in the top left here. However, this is generally less useful compared to the speed tiers tool itself. And finally, for this matchup view of Draftzone, at the bottom, there is a notes UI that you can use to put any custom note that you'd like, such as setup concerns from specific Pokemon, abilities to watch for, and more. And they will be saved whenever you want to look back on them or change them later. And when you are done with the match, and all is said and done for that particular week, you can click on this and add a score. Here you can manually enter information such as which Pokemon you and your opponent brought for that battle, and how many kills each Pokemon got, whether they fainted in the battle or not, and more. Or, to make things simpler, you can paste a Pokemon Showdown replay link here, and click the Analyze button, and all that information will be automatically entered into here. And once you've done that, you can submit your results. Of course, I did not put an actual link in there in this example, because I do not have such a link, as I made the example up. But once you do, you can always refer back to the score to see how things played out. And one other thing I forgot to mention, if you uploaded a document link for your team here, you will be able to refer to it by clicking on this button. And your draft board will be there. One other tool that may be handy if you want to look at a specific replay is the Replay Analyzer. At the time of this recording, this feature is in testing, and so it may not work properly, but the intent is for you to post a replay and click the Analyze button. In particular, this is a replay link for a random battle that I had undertaken in the past. Just a random battle, not a battle for a draft. But there is additional information to be seen here, such as kills, deaths, damage dealt, and notably, the Pokemon that were brought, how many kills they got, how much damage they dealt, and important events that occurred in the battle, as well as a chart of total team HP as the battle went on. And that is all for the features that you will be able to use on Pokemon Draftzone in regards to the Draft League. There are some other links here, but I will allow you to explore them in your leisure. And now I will hand things over to Zero, who will explain Pokemon Showdown and Showdown's calculator.
After the draft, that brings us to Pokemon Showdown. This is going to be the software where we battle, and it's a great software for that. Unfortunately, it comes with the downside of having to manually enter all of our drafted Pokemon and intended movesets and teams into the software. Unfortunately, we don't have anything that can bridge the gap from Draftzone to this yet automatically, but thankfully it has text formatting and things that are fairly easy to understand. Now, I have an existing box already, and we'll talk about that later, but I will show you how to start from scratch and create a Pokemon in this software just for yourself. Quick housekeeping notes, first of all. Obviously, it's best to choose a name. Now, I have chosen a name before, and I have logged in with an account, so I can just log in and save these sets as well, which is very nice. I recommend everybody does that, and try to keep a consistent name throughout. Also, there's some settings menus up here. You can choose between dark and light theme, you can choose layouts, single panel, left and right panels, etc. Log out, do all that stuff. You can also adjust effect and music volume. For some reason, there seems to be a bug where you have to mute the volume and then unmute it for the changes to go into effect, but web browser stuff. Anyway, let's start with creating a new team and maybe even a box. So let's actually start with a box, because this is where you'll be putting pretty much all of the Pokemon you draft just to show the pool that you can build from. Now you can import from text or URL if you just build the team in text first, but like I said, we don't really have an easy way, at least in a format that Showdown understands, to export from Draftzone to this. So I'm going to start by just adding a Pokemon. Now for this, I have a text document pre-prepared with some pre-done Pokemon, similar to what I had in the box, but this is just to show you how exactly to enter these Pokemon. So for example, let's say I drafted a Mienshao. Well, I can just type it, click Mienshao. Immediately it goes to the item it's holding. In this case, I'm holding a Life Orb. And the ability is Regenerator. Helpfully, this actually only shows available abilities and hidden abilities for this Pokemon. So usually it's best to just click the one that's there instead of searching through a list. As for the moves, same as the other things. This is going to be a sweeper, so we're going to choose Close Combat. Poison Jab, Triple Axle, and U-Turn. Once all of these are added, now we can get into the EVs and IVs. Now, of course, ideally, and since we're constructing these teams and not having to build them in games, we're pretty much always going to choose max IVs for these Pokemon, which is expected. However, the EVs, for those who don't know, are the stats that get improved every level up, and normally in Pokemon games are based on the Pokemon you KO. In this case, we can just choose them intentionally, and not have to worry about mucking them up with KOing random Pokemon. But there is one thing to note, you only get 508 EVs total spread across everything. And there's actually a feature that can guess the spread of EVs that you want for the Pokemon that you're using and the moveset. In this case, it actually guessed right. Exactly what I wanted, 252, which is the max available, in attack and speed, and then the remaining 4 in special defense. Of course, this doesn't affect things by much, but a little bit helps. Also, the nature selector is what these plus and minus icons are in the boxes. You can designate those manually or actually look through the list and choose whichever one you want. In this case, I want the Jolly one. I want it to be fast, and I don't mind the special attack being cut as it's a physical sweeper. Once you're done, the Pokemon can save as it is, you can delete it, move it in a list, import or export it, and this is where this becomes very useful. If we click export, I can copy this in the format that it already expects for the damage calc, which we'll talk about later. I can go to the plus button up here to add another Pokemon, but for now I'm going to go back. This is the box, and as a box it functions kind of like a box in the Pokemon games. You just store all of your used Pokemon here. So in the case of the example list I have, let's say we drafted 10 Pokemon. Let's check this box, and in this box we can see the list of all the Pokemon drafted. We can add more if we want, or we can even upload these to the Showdown database. That way you can keep your save across a mobile device or another computer. We can even choose a format if it's a common format that we're working for, and validate that this list complies with those rules. One really nice thing we can do from here is if we want, we can actually import-export the whole box, and we can do this as just a text file. We'll show you in the next chapter about the damage calc exactly how this works and how it's useful. But for now, let's go back. And let's even go back one more and create a team this time. From the team, of course, we can do similarly by selecting a format. We can name the team, and we can even upload things. But this is where it becomes extremely useful to have this list. Let's say we wanted to use the first 6 Pokemon in this list. So the Mienshao, the Venusaur, the Goodra, the Dusknoir, the Beartic, and the Talonflame. Let's choose all of these. And by the way, if you're looking to highlight multiple sections and you didn't know, if you hold Control, it allows you to highlight multiple sections without losing your prior selection. This is a very helpful feature, but for now, we're just gonna grab the first 6. Copy these. And now, if we have the movesets we want, we'll just go to New Team and import from text. Here we just paste our whole list, say import, and there we go. There's the entire list. And if we want to change things from here, we absolutely can. We can click the moves and just directly change them. We can also, if we have any empty or unfinished lists, or maybe even a drafted team that we didn't end up using, we can just delete them from here. Very helpful. We can even undo that delete. We can add further categorization by adding format folders, and we just have a list of all uncategorized teams. Also, helpfully, it will even show the generation of Pokemon that are present in this box. Very helpful. Moving on from Showdown, and with our copy-paste clipboard containing the text file of whatever team we're using, now we'll move to the Pokemon damage calculator. This is also by Showdown, and there's a lot of information, but don't be so intimidated by it. It's not all that bad. Depending on what generation rules you're fighting with, you'll be choosing between every Pokemon generation. Of course, some moves and field effects behave differently based on what generation you're dealing with. So if I were to choose Sun and Moon, for example, there's only so many field effects and lingering effects. Scarlet and Violet have a little bit more. And of course, the earliest games have not nearly as many. And of course are a bit simplified in other aspects. We're going to stick with Scarlet and Violet for now. We're also pretty much always going to be using the 1 versus 1 setting. The 1 versus all doesn't really come up here because we're pretty much just calculating damage between one Pokemon and another Pokemon. And if you're hitting something with a multi-attack, well, you'll probably just do the damage calculation for each of those Pokemon rather than as a group. For this calculator, it's relatively straightforward. If you didn't know, all Pokemon damage, except for ones with fixed attacks, are damage ranges. That means in the calculator, you'll have listed, depending on your settings of course, exactly what the range of HP dealt will be. And if the move is capable of recovery, something like a Giga Drain, you can choose that move and it'll give you an analysis of the possible damage amounts that move will deal. Also, status moves, of course, will always show 0 because they tend to not do any damage. Same with field effects. Okay, moving down a little bit, we'll get to the things that are relatively self-explanatory. Of course, with your Pokemon, you can manually enter anything you want. You can click here to maybe find exactly what you're looking for, but most likely what we'll do is we'll take the teams we've imported from Showdown and paste them into here. So for example, I'll paste in this set from a previous draft. You can actually import multiple Pokemon all at once in the format that it expects, which will be the name of the Pokemon, at the item it's holding, its ability, its Terra type, if that's relevant, its EV spread, its nature, its moveset. And that's true of just about every Pokemon you're going to add in here. Once you click import, it'll say successfully imported, hit OK, and now you'll actually see an additional checkbox here, the only show imported sets option. This is helpful and probably what we'll want to use because it allows us to click this and now only see the Pokemon that we put in rather than having to search for them. The clear imported sets button now deletes from their database anything you imported down here. As for the moves, now let's choose a relevant Pokemon. Let's choose this Deoxys Speed Form, and we'll see all of the moves it has that we can click on to analyze. We can click an opponent's moves against us and exactly what they will do to us. We can even checkbox the Terra type if the move is boosted. We can even, if there's specific Pokemon forms, we can choose those. We can set the level manually, or we can even scale the levels down to the common multiples, like level 100, level 50, and even level 5 for some fun. But very commonly you'll be using level 50. Doubles and singles does affect a few things, including some terrains and other effects that it's only possible to get in doubles. And as you can see, when we select field effects, so in this case, for example, if I select Wonder Room, you'll notice that my damage ranges change. We can turn that off, and with field effects, like environmental field effects, instead of unclicking them, where they show this blue, you click none to disable them. Now let's say the enemy has something like a light screen up. If I pull up light screen, you'll notice my special attacking move now has its range changed, and if it's my selected move, it will also update the analysis of the expected damage amounts and even the prognosis on the life of the enemy Pokemon. Next, I want to mention the Smogon Analysis tab, where if we click this, we'll open a tab that shows typical usage and profiles. Let's go back. Now, if we've autofilled a team, like we likely will, it will automatically fill out this whole set for us. But if we need to adjust it later, we absolutely can. As far as EVs go, you only get 508 total, spread out across any combination of these. Typically, you're going to want to put 252, which is the maximum allowed, in one stat and in another stat with 4 remaining, or specialize in one stat and split the remaining EVs between 2 other stats. As far as these dropdowns, these are to calculate stages of boost. So let's say you've Swords Danced 3 times, that would be +6. And now physical moves have their damage ranges updated. For something like our special attack, if we do the same with it, reset this back to normal, and we turn off the light screen, you'll notice now it's a very strong attack. Even with light screen, it's still a guaranteed one-hit KO. Nature, ability, item, and status are mostly self-explanatory. You can also change the current HP in case you have a move that cares about your existing HP or an ability that does so. And then at the bottom, this is where we can select any of the moves, but of course these will also be auto-filled if we're using them for this. One helpful thing here is you can always enable or disable the crit chance to see exactly what that does to the move, just to check. Play around the crit, people. Overall, this is a pretty easy calculator to use. It's relatively simple, just clicking on the options and seeing what happens. And of course, when you're done and you don't need to use it anymore, you can always clear imported sets and delete the sets entirely.
Now that we've covered these web tools, all that's left to do is some research into the format that you'll partake in, and find some strategies that you'd like to use.
If you have any specific questions about any of the features mentioned here, feel free to reach out to us or one of the commissioners for help. Of course, the point of this draft league is to have fun, so don't feel the need to stress over hundreds of draft and/or battle plans.
With that said, it is wise to prepare ahead of time whenever possible throughout the draft league.
Now you're ready to prepare for trouble
And make it double, if you're playing doubles.
to protect the team from devastation,
To unite your Pokemon within your nation.
to defeat the others because they aren't tough.
To extend your reach to the stars above.
0.
Servier,
We're blasting off at the speed of light.
don't surrender now, you're prepared to fight.
Meow! That's right, Bob! Up there!